Yeah. So the title of the presentation for today is to speak of the power of being present in the moment. At the moment, present in the moment in polyphonic dialogues. And what is the dialogue all about? To start to refer this Russian philosopher Mihail Bakhtin, who for me has absolutely been the person who opened up the door to understand the dialogical quality of life on the language, and actually also the power of dialogue. And a kind of basic assumption here, but I have agreed with Mihail Bakhtin's idea that dialogue is only partly a way of communication. It's a much more big aspect of dialogue is to look at it as a way of forming our lives in relation, in happenings that happens. In this reference he's saying authentic human life is the open-ended dialogue. Life by its very nature is dialogue. To live means to participate in dialogue, to ask questions, to heed, to respond, to agree, and so forth. And then the part that I very much like. In this dialogue, a person participates wholly and throughout his whole life, with his eyes, lips, hands, soul, spirit, with his whole body and deeds. So dialogue in this respect is not at all only the spoken words that we exchange with each other, but dialogue in this seen in this way is a way in which we realize our life on the whole, with all our embodied way of being and with all action that we take. And as Bakhtin says, we invest our entire life into the dialogic fabric of human life, into the word symposium, as he said. On the whole, I've had a series of lectures here, and so far in this series we have been focusing on the background of the psychiatric system in which I started my career as a clinical psychologist, and then we came into the way to reorganizing the psychiatric practices in the way that then later on took more and more use of the understanding of the dialogical qualities of being in the meetings with our clients, and perhaps lately also on the dialogical quality of the life on the whole. And a kind of a conclusion of the work that I have been involved with this, developing these ideas for 30 years. I could say very shortly that I have four kind of basic assumptions of relational life concerning the professional practice, but of course easily can say that this is not only our professional practice, but the life as a whole, and when the people come into a crisis, these elements of understanding the life are there, and actually they also can be a kind of basic elements both in life, but also basic elements to give a response to people in crisis. We are born into relations, and when we come to live into the relation from the very inhaling, in breathing in or drawing in, we are in those relations, and those relations becomes our embodied being. And those relations are not only one relation. It's not only the relation to the mother who gave us to birth, but most of the father is there from the very first second, and so on from the very first day on. Those relations in which the baby participates in a very comprehensive way become a kind of construction of the human being. And in that respect, much more accurate than to look at the individual as one entity is to look at the intersubjective being of human consciousness. So that intersubjectivity is the word that is used in this respect, even if intersubjectivity as a term is a bit problematic, but I follow the line because that is the idea that is most used here. Of course, we can stop a bit about the possible other ways to look at it and possible other names that would give the process. But when we are in the subjective, we are a construction of the relation that we come to be involved from the very beginning of our lives. We live in a polyphony of the voices. The polyphony is a concept that I borrowed from Mihail Pahti that has here in a specific meaning. But we are constructed of the many voices that comes out of the relation that are a part of our existence. And so the fourth hypothesis is that what is life? Life is dialogue between those voices, and this is the basic human experience on the
This is almost like you need a word, something like the word polylogue.
Yeah.
Because the root of dialogue is similar to the dyad.
Yeah. That's very true. So that someone has used also the idea that it's polylogue. Polylogue is one way to understand.
Is that okay?
Yeah. Very much. The word polyphony was first introduced by Mihail Pahti. Mihail Pahti started to make a research he was in the beginning literature researcher, and his interest on dialogues was very much focused looking at the great Russian classician novelist. He was very interested in Fyodor Dostoevsky's ways of writing, as he said, polyphonic novels. He said that Dostoevsky is very different compared, for instance, Leo Tolstoy's way of writing.
Mm-hmm.
When Leo Tolstoy have stories in which there is one hero and the other characters in the novel are in complementing the story of the hero, and it is the author who all the time know what is the story that I'm telling here, what is the starting point, what is the plot, what is the end of it. And Pahti said that this is not possible, this is not visible at all in Dostoevsky's novels, because in Dostoevsky's novels, according to Pahti, there is already as many heroes as there are people who come to speak, to have a language. And all those characters in the book, they have their own truths that no one else can deny. It's not possible, for instance, the main character, if you can find one, to have the truth that is more accurate than the truths of the other ones. And that's what Pahti said, that I love the word of polyphony on music word, because those people have to live in polyphony with each other. He says that as you listen to symphony orchestra, and you take a piece of instruments and a piece of some episode, and you listen those separately, it seems that those seem to do nothing with each other. But when you listen those at the same moment, they form a kind of polyphony. Even if he was a bit excusing, because he said that I know that musicians don't use it exactly in this way, but that was the way he used. Actually, he went on by saying that those characters in Dostoevsky's novel, they are in continuous dialogue with each other. If you have been reading Dostoevsky's novel, this is easily visible. It's a description of one dialogue after each other, and you never can predict what is the end of the dialogue when it starts here. And when the characters are in that kind of polyphonic dialogue with each other, they start to know each other better than the author does. And the only way for the author to go on is to have a dialogue with his characters, because he can no longer decide, this is the plot which I fulfill with these characters, because they have the independent life of their own. And accurately, this is not only for us. This was not only a kind of a kind of analysis of some novels in a literature, but became very accurate response when we were facing of the confusing experience after opening a door for the families to come in psychiatric meetings. Should we open the? And it is welcome. We have just started. So And I'm here on the way to, actually I'm very much in the opening to describe some basic assumptions of understanding relational life, and we stop here in the word of polyphony, what would it mean? And coming into and saying that the understanding of this polyphonic novel for us became a kind of solution to understand what was happening in our psychiatric treatment system, in which we opened the door for the families to come from the very beginning in to participate in the treatment. And when we still had an idea that this is a treatment in which we as therapists are the one who makes plans for the treatment and we want to follow the treatment, this was no longer possible when the patient and the client participate from the outset to the meetings, because they have a very active role and they have their effect of how to go on. And what was left to us was that we had to adapt to the way the families were behaving and to adapt to the way they saw the problems and to go on. And in the middle of this confusion, actually, this came a kind of a solution when I realized that I've heard this when I was young and radical student in the university. We were very interested of this Russian guy, Mihail Bachtin, in a bit other respect, but we also realized that he had been speaking about that, and all of a sudden I realized that we were, as a therapist, in a kind of author like in Dostoevsky's novels, who no longer could define them. This is the story of treatment, how it should go on. We were no longer Tolstoy's, but even much more like Dostoevsky, to do it in the way that our only option is to try to have a dialogue back with the characters, with the family members, with the patients who were involved in this actual treatment process. And step by step afterwards, the ideas of dialogical ways of being became basic rule of the system of treatment. And what I'm focusing here now for the last let's say some 4 or 5 years, I've been very occupied of the essence of these dialogical meetings, and why has that become important? But when we realized in this small province in which I was working as clinical psychologist, and we all were involved in building up the new system, we started a training for the entire staff, and this became a way of living. Everyone working in this province, they know what happens when they come into the meeting. It's a place to start to generate dialogue, and it's a kind of self-evident to do. And while doing that, there appear many times very rapid and a very rapid change in the problematic situation. Of course, it also can be the case that there is a need for quite long process of treatment, but still quite confusing to realize that the change can happen almost more rapidly than we can realize that something new is here. When there is, of course, a big interest of applying this idea in different contexts, but what has happened is that if we are used to work in a more structural way, this is very difficult. This is very challenging task to adapt to the practice. And people have become perhaps frustrated for the idea. And this is also a big concern to me. Why is it so difficult? Because it's so simple. And now I even realize after what I used this Bachtin's citation of Bachtin, who says that dialogue is all. It is so simple. It's a basic rule of life. And why is it so? And this is the first thing that we learn in our life, be in dialogical relation. But then, when we become professionals, we meet a masters of situation, we focus so much of controlling the processes by the intervention that we learn, and perhaps that is why we also lose a kind of touch of the basic quality of dialogical way of being. And this is my aim during the last years, to start to make understanding why dialogue is so a kind of powerful occasion, and what is it that it resembles in some way in human being on the whole. And there is this first theme to discuss the idea of intersubjectivity. And as I already said, so intersubjectivity is a very big term in science in many disciplines, and it's used in very many ways, and I use it also perhaps mostly in the way that I'm used to learn when I read the text of Colvin Trevarthen, who is a researcher in mother small baby communication mostly. But for instance, a philosopher Edmund Husserl someone has given a name. He's an intersubjective philosopher. So it's a part of philosophy, discipline of philosophy. Edmund Husserl already says a very important aspect when he said that when we make an observation of the reality, we can never isolate some target for our observation only, because all the other observation of the some object are with us. Actually, very important idea concerning of science, because what he's saying is here that in his mind it's impossible that we could isolate some phenomenon only for our scrutiny and then come up with the conclusion that is conclusion of our observation, because all the other observations that is done are always there with us to have the idea. But still, Edmund Husserl would say that in the end it's always a question of individual who is in the center. But in the way I've understood this research of Colvin Trevarthen and some other, I could add names as Daniel Stern, who is a psychoanalyst doing a lot of this mother-baby communication research. Mary Catherine Bateson, a daughter of Gregory Bateson, is one who is involved in this, and some others who in the end have come to also make research and conclusion. And actually our entire embodied being, including human brain, is started to be constructed in a dialogical way, in intersubjectivity. Coming back to Colvin Trevarthen, Colvin Trevarthen started at the 70s to make a research with of the communication between a mother or other grown-ups and the small baby. And now we speak small baby of some hours old, or some days old, or some weeks old. Not a baby who is 6 months or 1 year old. But what is the very first thing that happens in the world? And as he said that they immediately realize making video recordings of the first communication that happens with the newborn baby and the parent who is taking care of the baby. It's a very dialogical occasion in which they communicate with each other and respond to each other. And he said that our notion became out of it, that when we look at what happens, it's this musical quality of that interaction that started to be so interesting. And what they did, they hired researchers in music to become a part of their research group, and after that he said that all new understanding of life took place, and what is perhaps the main theme at the moment is that to say that life is not psychology, life is music. And how is this music started? For instance, he very much used an example of a film with a 3 weeks old baby playing with her mother. And this music, he says, that look at this mother and the baby, they compose a symphony of 4 pieces that last 29 seconds. And then he shows the diagrams, and so this composition is opened by both parts. It can be the baby who gives the first sounds, and mother responds, what are you trying to say to me? And then mother goes on, but what about this? And what happens with the baby? Is that immediately the baby responds with the same volume that is with the mother. And actually, I met this summer Colvin Trevarthen and said that in their latest research, what they have come up to see that actually the most part of these sequences are opened by baby, not the other part. It's the baby who gives the first sign, and then the other one is responding to that. And if we think this is the first experience of our life. And this is the life we come to live. We come into life and start to adapt our behavior. And although, of course, it's musical, but for a small baby, it's a very comprehensive way of being. All to be touched, to have the smell, to have the voice, and the small baby try to have with the eyes that are looking in different directions, eye contact with the one here. And this is a kind of restored in her memory of the body until the next one is there, and there is this kind of polyphonic experience in intersubjectivity from the very beginning that is there. There are many other researchers who nowadays have went on with this theme of research from many different respects, and noticing the idea, as Colvin Revalsin speak of the primarily intersubjectivity, that is the very first science until 6 months. This is an innate. When we are born, we have an innate capacity of dialogical, innate capacity to make dialogical openings and inviting the other to give a response me and give a response to what has responded me. And actually becomes a rule of life on the whole. There is a Norwegian researcher called Stein Rothe, who have been very occupied and actually find proof that our brain become constructed in the dialogical way based on these experiences. From the very beginning on, what have started to happen is a dialogical exchange of different perspectives in perhaps the one who has become most known of introducing this idea is the psychoanalyst Daniel Stern, and doing the. He's actually has not been doing so much on research, but he's mostly written about it. But for Daniel Stern, he says in one writing that this is a revolution of science. And when we think this from the psychoanalytic point of view, actually this is a very challenging, because if we think the way of Sigmund Freud give a description of human life, for Freud, the very first months are not a kind of not a psychological life. They are something like living in the same voices with the mother having this autistic period, and only after 5-6 months this psychological birth is taking place. But Daniel Stern, being a psychoanalyst himself, also said that this is all the opposite. From the very beginning, the little human being is an active psychological and of course embodied interaction with the surroundings. And it challenged also the other important person, Jean Piaget's description of the human development. I mean, Jean Piaget actually followed the very same idea that the very first happenings of the life are a kind of non-psychological, being kind of empty. And when I follow the ideas, I very much agree with the Stern's idea that this really is an revolution to understand. What about if we took seriously in all that we construct? What about we took seriously the idea that the newborn baby is an active participant in a shared experience and in a mutual construction of the actual reality? What would that mean for how do we construct kindergartens, and how do we start to generate the life? Because all what we have planned for is so much target oriented. There is the one teacher in the kindergarten and the children to take care of. There's the teacher and there's the object of the students. There's the therapist and the object of the clients, and so on and so on. So instead of thinking that the life is mutual, there is always someone to take care of the other, and this would be a very different point of view. When thinking this a bit further on, Mihail Bakhtin was very much on the same track when he said that I never can learn myself alone in isolation, but my only way to learn myself, to be known, bit familiar with myself, is to have the response in you. I have to borrow your eyes to see myself, or in some other occasion I see myself in your eyes. And of course, when we think what does that mean, when I see myself in your eyes, I see myself in the response that you give you in your eyes, and this is a response that is a kind of non-reflective, immediate, without any mediation, without any mediation occurring event of being immediately, as if we are in a dance with each other, in which we all the time apply what happens at the moment here and now. The very first books of Mihail Bachtin, one is called Art and Answerability, the other one is called Towards the Philosophy of Act. Of course, they were deserved translation because he wrote in Russian, but in both of the books he's very occupied. What do I see when I look at myself in a mirror? And his basic conclusion is that I never can see myself. I can see a kind of dead facade there, but the only way to have life of that picture, I learn the words of the other. Oh, he said that I have a gray hair. No, I don't have a gray hair. Or whatever are the comments that I have heard from the others. And then there is a life, then there is a relation being there while doing. But of course, for Bachtin later on, what became more accurate is the living relation in which we as human beings are constructed from moment to moment. But I'll come back to that. Those making research of mirror neurons actually lately have come to verify that that's taking place in a neuron level. In a neuron level, we respond to each other. This, for instance, Marco Iacoboni, Risoletti perhaps is the most known of their research when they started to make a research of apes. And what happens in the ape's brain is that when an ape sees another ape to take action to have food, those neurons activate in his or her brain of food, looking even if there is no food visible. And this is a kind of sign of that on neuron level there are some part of neurons in which we really respond to each other in a very concrete, in an embodied way. Most of the these mirror neurons are perhaps to say here that those, of course, people who are doing this mirror neurons research are very enthusiastic of their outcomes, but I think that there are also some limitations because it has been very difficult to replicate this in a human research, but still, of course, this is very acceptable idea to follow on the please.
Well, I'm just did my senior thesis on Merleau-Ponty and his phenomenon of perception,
okay.
so I'm familiar with Husserl, although less than Merleau-Ponty. The idea of bracketing, I'm curious to know whether you think that could be applied to how we perceive ourselves or the other in these dialogical relations.
Absolutely, I should have added that. For instance, this Marco Iacoboni is in the foreword of the book. He's saying that without knowing Merleau-Ponty's philosophy, we never had started to make a research of mirror neurons.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I'm very proud of the same idea. And of course, from Merleau-Ponty's idea of chiasmics interaction, on which this was the very last book that actually was published after we did. He was very occupied of that part of the reality, that we become to be connected with each other in a chiasmic way, besides the words, or perhaps before we come into words in which we respond. And in my mind, this is absolutely the very same understanding of life that Mihail Bachtin is doing. And of course, what is for me so important is the embodied way that Merleau-Ponty is all the time looking over the reality, that we are as embodied being in different places, and we all the time we are connected in this embodied way of being in the situation. So implementation of the same idea. We don't look at the, how would you say, we don't look at the painting on the wall, we look with the painting and so on. So it says it's the same thing, but always then we can be connected with someone. What happens that start to work with you and not being an object to our observation.
But that's what you mean with the micro system?
Yes.
It's everything's the interconnection?
Yeah. I don't think if, I hope this is visible because artists always go farther than we go. There is a Finnish surrealist, Otto Mäkilä, who 1929 had a painting Friends. And when you remember that Mihail Bahti says that I borrow your eyes to see myself. What do these friends? They need only 3 eyes. They don't need all of them because they can borrow the eyes of the other to construct the reality in a dialectical way.
An artist who very much is steeped in Husserl and Merleau-Ponty and has applied these concepts in his art is Lee Yu-Fan, the Korean artist. Familiar with this work?
No. What is the substance we work with?
So it's very much this idea that the work of art is a relational phenomenon and that there is no object without the subject.
Yes. Yeah.
And that the subject creates the experience depending. So in the exhibit that I saw at the Museum of Modern Art, this was best exemplified in his sculptures, which would allow you to view relations between objects from different perspectives and to have an entirely different experience based on that.
Yeah, probably.
It's very powerful.
Yeah.
How
He
does
does have
spell
this
his name?
painting. UFON. He had a doctorate in philosophy.
Yeah.
But was an artist.
Yeah. I should have heard, but yeah, I remember that. Okay, what does all this being related to the meetings that we have? I see some words now of this concept of polyphonic before coming back of the subjective quality of our meetings. This polyphonic idea of the reality is to see that we actually, when we have a meetings with our clients, as here as one example, Mikko, what's the name of the patient here? We have the voices that are here. Mikko was a teacher, and what has happened for him was that he got ill, somatic illness. He was on a disability for 1 year, and when he was on way back from the disability, actually he realized the employer no longer wanted him back, and step by step he became very depressive. There were other reasons also related, but that was one part of it, and all this ended in a very severe suicidal attempt, and he was hospitalized because being in a depressive and psychotic way. And in the hospital he was proposed to come to make a contact. In the place I work we have a psychotherapy institute, psychotherapy clinic, and they contact there. That was the point in which we started to meet. Her wife Sinikka, 2 grown-up children, Seppo and Lisa were there, and we work always as a team. We were 2 therapists, actually we were 3 because we always have also the last year students always. So this is the polyphony of the voices in an embodied way that is there. But actually we realized that this is only one part of the polyphony, perhaps the minor part of the polyphony, because not to think one person have one voice. But what becomes very interesting is to realize that all of us have a plenty of different voices with us when we come in the meeting. Mikko spoke in the meetings. We worked together altogether 16 months time. In the very first meeting we met with Sinikka and Mikko. We decided that he wants to have mostly individual meeting, but once and every second month we have a meeting with life also. We want to combine that process together. We spoke a lot of the voices of being a teacher and what are the relations in his working place, what are the duties that he was a teacher in occupational school in which he had a different, quite responsible subject and so on. Both of the subjects and social relations, the relation to the principal and so on and so on, that we conflict there were part of the voices of it. Mikko had a big concern of how has he had been as a father. The voices of being a father to her son were a big part. When they were small, I took them in my hands enough, and now when they are grown up, did I give good enough advices for them to take care of their lives? The voice of being a son to his father was a very important part of it, actually perhaps the most illustrated part of the whole. He said that in his family, father had been excluded from the family context, actually scapegoated for all the difficulties that happened in their life. And no one in the family wanted to seem not to have anything to do with the father. And then Mikko, as a grown-up, became interested. What in the whole world has happened in this? And started to make a contact with his father. They became friends. Actually, we could say they fall in love again as a father and a son. But father was so old that he was sick, and actually he died in the middle of this process. And the voices of losing the father when he died was a big part of our discussions. Actually, in the very first meetings already, we described of the situation of the father. Then we invited the voice of the father here by asking, what about if your father had been sitting with us here? What would he have said of this situation? Because said, yeah, I think that he had a concern of the situation. Then I took his word. He had a concern. What would he have said? That's what I try always. And what would the words be? Well, he could have shown his compassion. He could have shown his compassion to you. And how would you have been answering? So the father's voice became a part of this story in the first session. Concerning his wife Sinikka, we did not so much speak of her profession. He was very occupied both being a spouse to a depressed man. Actually, they had a quite unhappily.
She was a teacher as well.
She was teacher also, yeah.
And these are his views of their voices? Or their views of their own voices?
It's my view of their voices. It's my name of the voices of the team based on the themes that we discussed. Yeah, that is mine.
From things that he brought up in therapy.
From things that he brought up in the
and the therapy, I'm sorry because I missed a lot of the structure, so the therapy is you sitting with him alone or you sitting with him with these other therapists?
We sit him with all this. We have 3 therapists here.
So in the room there's 3 therapists and him?
Yeah. And most of them work so that there is at least 2 of us. I no longer like to meet patients alone. I very much like to have someone.
Because you may not hear all the voices.
Yeah,
you may hear.
Yeah, and of course when I think of the dialogical quality of the existence, what is the basic in dialogue is the triad. And it's not one-to-one relation. And I want to take use of that idea in the way in my practice that we are already here. There is always a third perspective when 2 persons are speaking the voices. In one meeting of, I was on the way to say that she had an interest in being a spouse, but also she spoke a bit of her sisters. Those were the themes that she brought into the session we had together. Perhaps 2 months after the first meeting we sat together with Sinikka and Mikko, and in those meetings they spoke of their conflict or marriage they had. And Mikko said that he's so sad because he realized that something he has tried to avoid his life, and he saw how the marriage was with mother and father. All of a sudden he seems to be in the same kind of situation. And this was so tough for him that he had done all wrong. And then we asked, what about, again invited the father's voice, what about if your father would have been here and heard all this? What would his voice have been in this situation? And again we were in a discussion in which he gave the voice to the father's voice and had a discussion about it. And he had already said something that he actually been orientated in cultural things. He had been writing poems when he was younger. So we knew that he has this orientation and asked, would you think that you would write a letter to your father? He was a bit surprised of that idea. But then well, perhaps that could be possible. After some weeks when he came, perhaps 2 weeks, when he came to a session, we had a session, at the end of the session said, actually, last night I sat down and wrote a letter to my father. He had a signed pocket in the trousers, it was what crumpled paper he took from the pockets. But he is a very humoristic man, and it was fine opening the letter. When he started to read of the letter, it was something like saying, "Hi, Father, I've come into a mess in my life. I'm sorry that you have been also mixed with this mess also." So it was so funny way to start to speak. And then he read the letter and became moved. Of course, we all other who listened became also moved. It's a very moving moment when he told the story. What was for him, it was a bit too heavy because his impression was that he could not hold his face while becoming moved while reading the text that he had written. So heavy that after the meeting he got an idea, should I kill myself because I lost my face while starting to cry. But something new had happened, so he took contact in a crisis services and we could speak about it. But in the session we then asked that after you wrote a letter to your father, could you answer that letter from father to the son? And again, now it took a bit longer time. After 4 weeks he came into a session and said that actually I wrote an answer from father to his son. And when he now started to read the letter, the lexicon was all different as it was in his letter to father. When his letter was very metaphoric and symbolic and very funny utterances and so on and so on, but the letter from the father, who is not at all used to write anything, was a very short sentences each after each other. And my colleague Eli said that when I listened to you, I noticed that in my mind the language is very different than you. Did you realize that? And Mikko said yes. I noticed it immediately. When I sat down and started to write from the voice of the father, it only came so. So the voice of the mother took care of my hand and wrote those sentences. And this is very interesting because what he's here saying is that the voice is not only metaphor, it's very concretely embodied in my body's memory, restored in my body's memory. And when I really sit down and have a look at the world from the point of view of the father, my body acts as according to that voice.
Do you ever work with this concept of helping patients to find where in their body some of these voices are stored?
Yeah.
Physically.
Yeah. The interesting.
As I said, I have to.
Yeah, no problem. The interesting point here is to. Interesting point here is then think of us as therapists being involved in this setting, and actually the more interesting point for me to think, because actually we are in the very same situation concerning the voices that we are. If I think myself here, I have these professional voices that comes out. I'm a clinical psychologist, I'm a family therapist. I have professional and ethical duties that I know when I have a client who after several very serious suicidal attempts comes there. How do we work in a way that we do not increase the risk of suicide but decline it, and so on and so on. And this is all over. In the first meeting, in all meetings, in the last meeting. But then when Mikko started to speak of being a father, so the voices in my life, being a father to my own children, are there active. Being a son to his father, The voice is for me being the son to my own parents out there. I'm a man, as Mikko is a man, the voices of being a man is there. And of course more and more intimate voices when he speaks of the death of the father. Of course the voices that I have while losing my own father are there. And the same happens with my colleagues. She is a younger therapist, female, his mother, and so on and so on. And the richness comes out that we always are there in the plenty of different voices. But of course, when we think of our voices, it's not the way that I start to speak of, I understand how difficult it is to lose your father because I've also lost him. But they are there in the way we are in the dance with each other in the very present. In the way I look at him when he speaks of an issue that is very difficult for him. In the way that I adapt the volume, my voice when he speaks of the loss of his father, when his rhythm of the speak becomes slower, and so in the way we sit here, in the way we move our bodies in relation to the movements of the others. The entity, the comprehensive entity is here. And in a way I think that we have a dialogue between here, but there is also an ongoing dialogue between the voices that happens here. And these voices are a kind of as I understand, as in the implicit, even if I have a bit question of the term, but not in the spoken narratives, but in the very moments in which we adapt our behavior to each other. And of course I could say that the more dialogical practice we are developing, the more place for those voices are there to be actually part. The more we have thinking of us as a professional who with our intervention take a control of the situation and stand as neutral to the problem of the clients, the more of course the professional voices are there at the place. There's not so much for the personal voices to be there. Okay, we don't need.
Is that the horizontal voice? The vertical voice?
Vertical voices is the one who goes down
right.
here.
And then the horizontal is when you as the...
horizontal is the one.
Like when the teacher is speaking to the teacher and then...
yeah, or perhaps these are all the vertical voices that are speaking to each other.
To each other, that's the horizontal.
Yeah, that's the horizontal, what happens in this way. Voices on the whole are the speaking personality, the speaking consciousness, Mihail Bachtin, only to refer that actually this is what we are. And Bachtin is very, he had a quite, he was quite critical of the psychological process, of the psyche on the whole, as he said that what is that we call psyche or psychological? Behind your bones of the eyes, there is nothing. There is only biological cell function. When it comes psychological, it's totally beyond the boundary, as he said. And for him, what is psychological? It's the voices and the dialogue between the voices, both in the outer, but also in the inner, inside of us. And the same kind of understanding had a philosopher Plato in his early part of his works, when he was saying that when mind is thinking, it's simply talking to itself, asking questions and answering them and saying yes or no. And when we agree, when those voices agree something, then we say this is a complete. Mihail Bachtin said, as I said, what is psychological is being totally on the boundary. And we are embodied being in the way that we produce the utterances through which we become connected with each other in something that is in. When we utter ourselves in the language, we are the subjects of the essence of the utterance in a physiological sense. it is my body that is doing the work to make the address, the speech, for instance, or writing the letter. When we speak, we use the muscles here a lot to have the hailing both out and in and out and in. And then I learned by mimicking my parents and some others there to do right movements on my vocal cords. Then they formed the words, and that was the starting point of spoken speech. And in that sense we are subject. But at the moment something becomes out of the mouth visible and hearable. The utterance is both audible but also visible. At the very moment it's no longer my words, but all the one who are there and here, they become a co-author of the utterance, not a recipient of the utterance. That is of course the more or less the communicative way to understand the communication. One is delivering some message and the other one receiving. But for Bhakti's idea this is impossible. When I say some word, let's say I would start to speak of eating disorders, it's not possible that I submit my understanding of eating disorder to someone who is listening to that. But what happens is that immediately after hearing the words, all the voices that we have, all the ideas that we have of eating disorders become active. And so we co-construct we co-author the story of this. And this is very important for the dialogical meetings in my mind, because we no longer can see us to be in a kind of communication position in which the therapist delivers something and the patient is receiving, or the opposite, but it's always a kind of co-authored work. And this co-authoring happens here and now, in this very moment, at this very point of time, and actually in a very short point of time. Bhakti repeatedly was occupied of that we are living in the once occurring participation of being, we are living in the once occurring event of being, as it's translated in some other way. Everything happens only once, and in this occasion everything needed is there, present, here and now. The past, the history we have, it's here and now. Of course the present moment, and of course the future that we anticipate in our actions in here and now. And it decreases the idea that we would need so much of the information of the past. What is the cause? What has happened? This and that has happened. We do not need in our professionals meeting in psychiatry so much of the information of the journals to be familiar, to go on. But everything is constructed with us who are here and now in this moment. Thinking of our open meetings in which the family, the patients and other participants is very important notions, because it's both relieving but of course it's very demanding at the same time. It's relieving in the way that if I realize that at this very moment I could not catch something or perhaps something I did not focus so much that I realized afterwards should have been focusing, I can do it in the next time. Not always, but most often. It's very demanding because in the other hand, it's saying that I can't waste any possibility for new meetings. In a way, as Martin says here, that every meeting is a first meeting, even if being in a role of the 10th meeting with the same family. Even if we meet with the family for the 10th time, it's always the first meeting in which always new meanings are generated for the problems, for the things that we speak about, even if those same issues have been spoken up in previous meetings. So now I know that I can't afford to waste any possibility for new meetings, even if I could be already had a feeling that we are quite stuck with this family in the situation, but it is the case that every conversation creates its own language here and now at this moment. My good friend, a Norwegian Professor Tom Andersen, who unfortunately passed away some 3-4 years ago. Tom Andersen was the one who generated the idea of reflective processes as a part of psychotherapeutic practices. Tom was very occupied during the last years of his life of 3 kind of realities in our discipline. He said that there is this reality of categories that is a part of of mental health services. We have a diagnostic category. He's either depressed or psychotic. One diagnostic category is right and the other one is wrong. In this, there would be no sense otherwise to use them. It's either or reality. The second reality is the one in which therapists also use this both and, as he said. When we come into the meeting with the family, when someone has got diagnosis of schizophrenia or whatever, it's no longer a question of who has the right, who is right in defining what is the right diagnosis. It's much more up to discuss what is the meaning for everyone after hearing this, and now everyone's opinions are important to construct this both and reality. The voice of the son, the voice of the mother, the father are as important, and the professional said the voice of the doctor who made the diagnosis, but as well the voice of the nurse who is the contact person are as important to constructing the kind of joint. But then Tom said that there is this third reality, but he was very occupied, neither nor reality. That happens before we come into any words. You can say it's neither that nor that, but I know that something is happening, something is taking place here. And that something is taking place here, something that based on our shared experience, being in this very moment together and having that. Something that comes before we come into any words, to put words on that. When we come into the meeting, we shake hands. That is embodied action, but of course we never have any words for that handshake. It is here, and it is what with us when we come and sit down and start going. The very same way Daniel Sterr was occupied of the importance of present moment. Daniel Sterr, as I said, is a psychoanalyst, but he's very critical of the traditional way of understanding psychotherapeutic work, when he said that we usually understand that the psychotherapy is the cooperation between therapists and the clients to have meaning of the stories for the clients in a cooperation. And we in such way aim at explicit knowledge of the meaning of the stories that people tell of the life. And now very much because of his studies of what happens between the baby and the adults in the early interaction, he says that what is more important is this implicit knowing that comes out of the embodied relation that we have with each other. And it's secondary to focus on the narratives that the people tell, and it's primary to focus of the implicit that happens while we tell the narratives and respond to each other. Actually, Stern describes as his clinical practice has changed in psychotherapy in the way that they have totally stopped guiding clients in any way. They sat down, it's individual psychotherapy, and that's a different to Tom Anderson and my own work. But in individual settings, they sit down with the clients and ask what would you like to speak today, and all our session is focused on the story of the client. Follow the story of the client without any guidance. And Daniel said that it is no longer happens that they are empty of options, because there's always many options goes on. And in this, Stern defines what is the present moment based on his studies. He said that present moment is 3 seconds. Variation between 1 to 10 seconds, but that is the point of time in which we should be alert to be there. The background of his notion is that when a mother is breastfeeding the baby, it's an active choice situation. It's not only you give the food to the baby and that's it, but it's the active connection that you have to do with the baby to have the eating going on. And he says that it happens every 3rd second that you have to do an active choice with the baby. And in his mind, this is something that repeats in our life. And on the whole, if combining all this so far what we have been spoken about is that in our meetings, and of course now I very much think of the meetings with the kind of meetings with families in which there are many clients and also many therapists. Of course there can be only one therapist, but for me I'm very much used to work as a team. But I don't see why this could not be used also when describing a meeting with one therapist, one client. But there are two simultaneous histories taking place. The second, what is second here? This was the part that I was previously very occupied of the narratives that people tell to each other of the past incidents, and how do we as therapists respond in our words, and how is this dialogue in words of the things that are central for the people takes place, and which kind of meanings are we do we construct. But now, at the moment, I'm much more occupied of the first one, of the embodied living in the present moment here and now, which I actually think that it is the much more important part of the sessions with our clients. It's always a shared experience, shared in embodied way, and it's focused very much of this implicit way of knowing, but it's always a kind of unique. You never can have the same experience. It's always a unique experience of the same shared experience. Perhaps
you bring that out overtly?
Excuse me?
You bring that out overtly in the moment? You bring it out with the client or in the therapy? Like the comment, the experience about the present?
Yeah. It comes out in those comments. In those comments that we do, what happens here and now. If it happens, for instance, that the client is speaking of something, and then we notice that while speaking, she becomes moved of what she's saying. That affects my response to her, and I choose: do I respond to the story she's speaking about, or do I respond of becoming moved by telling the moment? And I prefer nowadays to respond to that part of her utterance. In a way, I could, or perhaps only to say that yes, these are difficulties. I try to be very sensitive that I don't make any interpretation. I don't say that you seem to become moved when you see. That is all to a kind of attacking her or being outside who gives a meaning for that. But when if it would happen that while one is speaking and all of a sudden in the story I became so the story stops and there is only tears who comes out of it. In that moment I could give a much more open comment. I could ask if tears had words, what could they say? In that way to give place for the embodied experience that happens exactly at the moment that we are speaking, and not give meaning for what was told. And I think that all in here we are back in the very. I started this lecture by asking why is it so difficult, even if it's so simple. And again, using the words of Mihail Bachtin when he said that for a human being there is nothing more terrible than a lack of response. For a human being there is nothing more terrible than a lack of response. And it's a very concrete guideline for me when I'm in a meeting. Now I know that what is my task here is to give a response. And actually nothing else. That's what is needed, and no more. But we are so occupied always to something more. We don't realize that it is the response that is the most relevant one. In a way, what I should say, of course I don't use this word, but my answer to the client is I hear what you say, and what you say is important. Give acknowledgement both the content and the way that she is speaking about it. because being heard as such is already a dialogical relation, as Martin said. And of course, when we are back in a dialogical relation after the monological dead end, what crisis often is, here we are again. Here we are in the life in which we have the mastery of different perspectives. Because there is this ongoing dialogue between the voices that helps us to find a solution of how to we go on. I have an example here of to try to make it more comprehensive, more understandable. This is a very specific family that I'm actually working now at the moment. We have met with these people already for more than 5 years now, and it started 5 years ago when the daughter to his family, to the mother, she was 46, made a call to our psychotherapy clinic and said that at last our family need to come together to discuss what has happened in our life. Then we met. It was she, her brother, 50 years of age, who seemed like to having a long history of psychiatric care. And afterwards we would know that, learn to know that he has been in almost 35 years in some psychiatric institution, very chronic situation for very long time. And an old, very fragile woman, their mother, actually the mother seemed older than she actually was, but still. They came here. They said that our charges started 40 years ago, and it was the case that the father had died, and after that, mother decided to take care of the family. We don't need to think of the old things. But some years after, brother started to have problems, started to act in a very unpredictable way, and for this little daughter being there some 11 years or 12 years of age, this was a catastrophe. She lost the contact to her brother entirely, and brother even could be a kind of violent and threatening to her, and this was all traumatic, and she was never invited to any meetings in which mother had brought her son to the psychiatrist to discuss of the problem. So she was really left outside of this process. Step by step, his situation became worse, and he was hospitalized for the first time and for the second time. And actually it happened that during this 35 years before we met, he had been almost all the time in institution with many tries to come out, but not succeeding. Year before we met, he had moved back to his mother, lived together with mother, and things had started to be a bit calmer at that point of time. In every session that we meet, mother always said that I don't want to speak about this, I don't want to be here because I'm afraid that if we discuss of all things, my son will be psychotic again. And I'm only here because my daughter wants it. And this was perhaps some 1.5 years, perhaps already almost 2 years ago, we had this short dialogue in which she, for the first time, in the presence of all those, have some words to her experience.
Is she being the daughter?
Yeah, the daughter. Yeah.
So the mother's in the room.
Yeah.
And the brother.
Yeah, the brother in the room. And actually, in every meeting, it's the nurse for the son there, because we wanted that to have in that way the psychiatric treatment system to be involved. And we were very happy because they agreed of that. And she said that I have not been recognized. I said, you have not been recognized. For me, actually, in dialogical way, I very much repeat and try to repeat word by word what people say, because that's my way to be connected to the saying that people say. Throughout my life, I've been excluded from the family. She said, at last I want to get rid of this symbioticness. Then I again repeated the word. You said that throughout my life, I've been excluded from the family. Then you said that at last I want to get rid of this symbioticness. It sounds like you are saying two things at the same time. being excluded and being within the symbioticness. And then comes a long silence, 10 seconds. 10 seconds silence, yeah. Yes, that's what I said. But so far I can't say anything more about it. And now thinking what I was saying here before, for me the relevant 3 seconds happens here.
So far.
No, here after this, when I said it sounds like you are saying two things at the same time, so that we managed to stay silent here. It would have been so easy to say that it's understandable that you have such a contradictory experiences because the life has been so difficult for you. But while doing that, there is always the risk that that would be our work for the experiences that they have. But now, very fortunately, after that we were silent here, she could hear her own words that she said to herself. It's a Russian psychology level who is very much also have been working with dialogical quality development languages that we don't know what we think before we have said it.
That's why I was struck by her, but so far I cannot say anything more because
that is very.
It causes her to pause and she can't articulate.
Yeah, but it's so actually so beautiful saying. But so far, this is so far I have come, but I cannot go on. I have no words to go on yet. But actually, this really was a kind of turning point. This session that we had, and now she has a lot more words of it. What has happened after? We meet very seldom. We meet perhaps 3 times a year, and so. But every meeting that we have is a very as a life itself, as a world by itself, and so. So she has much more word. In the last session we met, they started to argue with the brother who has had it worse, he or she. And it was the first time they could openly put their agendas on the table. But it was a very anxious, a very confusing situation for the mother. But what happened was that he did not become psychotic.